is, what is the overall figure of tax theft in Pakistan?
According to various estimates, almost 50% of the due taxes are not being paid.
The issue of filer and non-filer.
Actual problem is that Pakistan is not collecting taxes that are sufficient to meet its expenditure needs.
Why FBR has not been able to promote the tax culture in Pakistan?
Matinsa, we have to first acknowledge that it is not entirely the role of FBR. FBR has been tasked only to collect tax.
To what extent do you think the role of the chief of FBR matters in overall performance of this tax collecting authority?
Any other experience in any other field cannot equip you to become a good tax collector.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Hello and welcome to program Insight in V News English. Dear viewers, tax reforms have been a very, very long-standing issue in Pakistan. Other than tax reforms, there is also an issue of to-be filer and non-filer in Pakistan's top tax regulatory authority, which is called Regulatory and Tax Collection Authority, which is called FBR, Federal Board of Revenue. Why government has tabled a law before National Assembly of Pakistan so late that suggests more tough measures for those people who are not filing tax returns? There will be more tougher penalties for them. But why it has been so? Why government has tabled this law so late before Pakistani Parliament? And particularly after tabling this particular bill before Parliament, and once the bill is adopted and become an act of Parliament, will it be easier for the government or for Tax Collection Authority (FBR) to include every Pakistani citizen into the tax net? And question also arises: there are still large number of wealthy Pakistanis who are outside the tax net. To discuss about that, who could be in the tax net, who could not be, what are the tax reforms, what are the issues with the FBR. To discuss this all and all associated issues, today we are fortunate to have with us a former member of Federal Bureau of Revenue and who has been boss of Inland Revenue and Tax Reforms, Dr. Muhammad Iqbal. And he will be speaking to Program Insight and will be answering all relevant questions related to Federal Board of Revenue. What are the gray areas? Why it has been unable to catch the big fishes and things like that. We are fortunate to have Dr. Iqbal Saab with us. Very warm welcome to Program Insight, Dr. Iqbal Saab.
Thank you. Nice to be with you.
Exactly. First, we will start with this particular bill, the issue of filer and non-filer. If I'm not wrong,
basically, the actual problem is that Pakistan is not collecting taxes that are sufficient to meet its expenditure needs. A simple measure could be used to gauge the effectiveness of tax collection is the tax to GDP ratio. Or in other words, how much a country is paying out of its total income in the form of taxes to the government. So we have a tax to GDP ratio that has been consistently around 10%. In developed worlds, it touches 35%, 45%. And to put it into perspective, even the African countries have an average tax to GDP ratio of around 15%. And the highest among Africa is Tunis, which is collecting about 32% of its GDP as taxes. Now, in this context, if we see a tax to GDP ratio of less than 10% for Pakistan, it puts the things into perspective that the tax collection is not sufficient to finance the running of the government as well as meeting the infrastructural needs and to provide a conducive environment in which the society can function. So that is the actual problem that Pakistan faces, a lower than required tax effort. Then we come to certain prescriptions. One idea is that since we have a lower number of persons who are paying taxes and filing their returns, this is one of the main feature or main reason for the low tax to GDP ratio. So to address that problem of lesser people filing their tax returns and discharging their tax liabilities, an attempt is consistently being made to increase the number of return filers. So that is
Exactly.
the problem of filer and non-filer. But to put it into further context, we have to realize that the major portion of our taxes comes from indirect taxes, which are actually taxes on consumption. So any time you buy something, you are paying tax
You
in the
pay a
form of
tax,
sales
exactly.
tax. So for that, the number of filers is not important because the sales tax is collected by businesses and the burden is passed on to the consumers. So as far as the indirect taxes and taxes on consumption are concerned, the number of filers is not important. But when we come to direct taxes, mainly being the income tax, then normally the income tax is paid at the time of filing of return by a taxpayer. Though we have made certain adjustments to cater for the peculiar society in which we are living, we are also collecting certain withholding taxes, which are a form of income tax, but they again are not dependent on the filing of tax return by a taxpayer. So, laying too much emphasis on the number of filers is probably not going to solve the problems of low tax collection. But it definitely has to be a plank towards any effort of improving the overall tax collection in Pakistan.
When anyone makes income or earns from some business,
Yeah.
and there are very large businesses in Karachi as well. So these all top businesses, some of them do pay tax, some of them are beyond the tax net. I mean, they are not filer. Particularly, I will refer to you to some manual businesses, particularly in cloth market and fish market and electronics markets and things like that, where everyday transaction by a businessman goes into the billions, but yet they are out of the tax net. So, do you think this particular bill will also bring them into the tax net?
So basically, what this bill will achieve, if it is successful, is it will force people to file their tax return. But the
True.
only problem is not that of non-filing of return. The income that is being declared in the return also has to be correct income, the actual income. For
Mm.
example, if a person is earning, let's say, 10 million rupees in a year, but he files a return declaring income of only 1 million, the consequential tax payment would also be lower. So the actual problem is to somehow force a person or to motivate a person to not only file his return but also declare the actual income that he is earning, so that his tax liability is discharged according to the potential benefits that he's deriving from the economy. So the actual challenge is somehow enabling the people to declare their actual incomes and discharge their tax liability accordingly. And that problem cannot be resolved unless the economy is documented to the entire extent. The examples that you have cited are all working in, let's say, probably it would not be right to say the informal sector, but in the undocumented sector. Our economy operates without the level of documentation that we witness in other countries. So if a person is earning, let's say, X amount, the government or the tax collector lacks the apparatus to actually arrive at the figure of X that he's earning. So we are following a system of self-assessment where a person computes his own income and files and return declaring that income. That is true, especially in the cases of small and medium businesses. This problem does not arise in the case of salaried taxpayers because the salary
That
is
is
documented.
documented.
The employer withholds the tax due on the payments that he's making to his employees and pays tax into the government treasury. So, to a larger extent, the salaried persons are discharging their actual tax liabilities, whereas in the case of businesses, due to
Hmm.
the absence of the desired level of documentation, the government has to rely on their own declarations, whatever they want to pay as tax. And how can we come out of this problem is that the taxpayer has to feel that has a stake in the system. If the government is providing the required facilities to the taxpayers, they will come out to discharge their actual liabilities. But at present, what this bill is demonstrating is that the government, instead of somehow motivating the taxpayer to discharge their true liabilities, is adopting the route of coercion. The people, an attempt is being made to somehow force the people to discharge their tax liabilities. Whether it can be successful or not is a question that needs to be debated at a larger forum. It is basically we need to understand that payment of taxes is not just an administrative issue. It goes to the root of the relationship of the state and the citizen. It actually is the most important component of the social contract that a state or a
True.
society has with its citizens. Unless the social contract is working effectively, the problem of low payment of taxes cannot be resolved.
This is what my immediate question is. You very nicely explained different things. Why FBR has been failed in developing a tax culture in Pakistan. That means sensitizing every citizen that you will pay tax, and in return, the state system will continue to function. Hospitals, communication network, social security system, welfare, socioeconomic development, and these all things. Why FBR has not been able to promote the tax culture in Pakistan?
Matita, we have to first to acknowledge that it is not entirely the role of FBR. FBR has been tasked only to collect taxes,
Correct.
but what the citizen should get in return, FBR has no control on that. It is the other organs of the state which have to facilitate the
For
taxpayer to
example,
provide. For example, health. You talked about the health facilities or hospitals or education or the road infrastructure. FBR only collects the taxes and passes it on to the federal
yeah.
pool of divisible pool from where it is distributed to the provinces, and certain expenses are made by the federal government. FBR has no control over that. It is only the collecting arm, but the arm which can provide facilities to the citizens is not under the control of FBR. So it involves all of the government to restore the confidence of the taxpayers into the state apparatus.
All citizens.
FBR is doing what it can. It can only adopt more and more coercive tactics to somehow force the people. But personally, in my opinion, only coercion cannot work. Unless the
It
people
will be
themselves feel,
counterproductive.
it can be counterproductive because the market always finds solution. You introduce a regulation that, in your opinion, will force the people to declare their correct incomes. But market somehow finds a way to go about that. It finds solutions, and in the long term, these coercion tactics cannot be successful. This is my personal opinion. I may be wrong.
So let's discuss these tax reforms. And my question is, all successive governments have been talking about during PTI government, there have been a lot of tax reforms initiatives. Current government is also engaged. Every week there is a meeting by Prime Minister that tax reform. In the past, PMLN government, in the past, PPP government, tax reforms have been a major issue. So why it has been quite unsuccessful? Why this tax reforms issue has not been completed?
I think for that we will have to go back into history. So ever
Hmm.
since basically we gained independence in 1947, prior to
Hmm.
that we were under a colonial rule. Under a
True.
colonial rule, the subjects are not motivated to cooperate with the government. So prior to the independence, there was no incentive for any citizen to pay his due share of taxes.
Hmm.
We did inherit a fairly advanced taxation system at the time of independence.
True.
After independence, we somehow, due to our geostrategic location, fell into a habit of accepting doles in the form of grants, and concessional loans were
Hmm.
forthcoming, and the earlier governments did not have any motivation to increase the capacity of tax collection because
Hmm.
funds were coming, and it was simple to expend them for welfare as well as for personal benefits by the ruling class. This tradition needed to be broken, and an evolved and sustainable economy needed to be
Hmm.
developed. It somehow was not done. The people still feel that whatever they pay to the government is not expended to give optimum results. Unless that confidence of the people is restored, that if we are paying taxes and we are being compensated accordingly. The government is providing facilities, no funds are being wasted, and the expenditure is made where it will yield the optimum result. So basically, as I said earlier, the entire social contract needs to be reworked.
Revisited.
We need
Hmm.
to re-evolve. We need to redefine the relationship of the state and the citizens, and how Pakistan is going to function.
Hmm. This social contract needs to be reviewed, revisited.
Yes.
Hmm. Dr. Muhammad Iqbal Saab, when we talk of the tax collection, many times it have been reported that some of the very big businesses in Pakistan have been involved in tax evasion, in tax theft, and that is not possible without the connivance of the tax collecting authority. To what extent it is true that some of the very large businesses which have income in billions of rupees, but they pay tax only few million?
Yeah, that is correct. That is absolutely correct, and the reasons are multiple and diverse. One reason
Hmm.
is the capacity of the tax collecting machinery, whether
Hmm.
it has the requisite tools which can enable it to collect the due taxes. These are lacking. Then there are certain problems, but as I said earlier, the major problem is lack of documentation. When
Lack of
certain economic
documentation.
when economic transactions disappear in thin air without leaving a trace, it becomes very difficult for the tax collector to get the due share of the government from those economic transactions. Similarly, the problem or element of connivance is there. The entire state apparatus, the entire official machinery suffers from problems of that you are alluding to. They connive with the taxpayers, and they somehow facilitate them in evading the taxes. That problem cannot be overlooked. It is there. But that problem cannot be resolved by somehow transforming the state collectors into angels. The system has to ensure that. The system has to ensure that the possibility of evasion is minimized, because as long as the system allows or provides opportunities for evasion, there will always be delinquent persons from both sides, from the taxpayer sides as well as from the tax collecting machinery, who will work with each other to deprive the state of its due share. So that's basically systemic solutions have to be found. to be identified and implemented, and only then that the problems can be resolved.
Dr. Muhammad Iqbal, sir, can you give a rough estimate how much tax amount every year is evaded by the top billionaire business people? There, you have been on top positions, you have been in policy making, you have been in decision making position at FBR, and you must have come across with such reports and data where tax is evaded by the large companies. What is the overall figure of tax theft in Pakistan?
Matin sir, first we have to identify that the tax evasion cannot only be attributed to the large businesses. Even small and medium businesses are
That could
also
be also.
not paying their
Okay.
due share of taxes. So the impact of evasion by a large business would be definitely higher than the evasion by a small businessman or a
Small and medium.
retailer or a corner shop. Obviously, he does not have that kind of business which would enable him to evade an equivalent amount of tax. But the degree may be the same, the percentage may be the same. If a small business is concealing 50% of his the extent of his business, that 50% would be much lower than let's say 10% evasion by a much bigger business. So the problem, we cannot focus only on a certain class of taxpayers. We have to extend the requisite attention to all the entire economy, because various businesses are interlinked. If one person, if a business A is transacting with business B, and business A is not declaring his true transactions, then
True,
business B would also be constrained to not declare the transactions with business A. So it is basically a network in which each component or each element is contributing towards that tax evasion. And coming back to your question regarding the quantum of evasion, so basically
exactly.
by definition that cannot be quantified, because if it would be quantified, then it would mean that it is visible to the tax evasion is somehow
It
visible,
is visible.
and if it is visible, then it should not obviously exist. So, but various estimates have been made by economists. According to various estimates, almost 50% of the due taxes are not being paid.
How much? Repeat again.
Almost 50% of the at the maximum.
50%.
So ranging between 20 to 50%, 30 or 35% may be the actual figure.
So it's a huge amount.
It
It's
is
a
a,
huge figure. I
it is
mean,
a huge amount,
50%.
and unless the government can find a way to tap that reservoir of untaxed amount, the problems of economy cannot be resolved.
So another issue is the who could be the boss of FBR. Recently, first time a bureaucrat was appointed during PPP government. We have seen a person with an IT background was appointed as FBR chief. Then during the PTI government, there was a special assistant to Prime Minister who was a former Federal Secretary, Dr. Waqar Masood Khan. Then there's sometimes there are people within FBR who have been made chief or the head of FBR. To what extent do you think the role of the chief of FBR matters in overall performance of this tax collecting authority? A bureaucrat could be a better person, or a political person, or a person within the FBR could be the right person to head this body.
Matin sahab, to answer this question, we first have to realize that tax collection is a specialized job. Any other experience in any other field cannot equip you to become a good tax collector, because you need to have a reasonable knowledge of multiple fields. You need to understand the economic aspects. You need how to understand the law, because all taxes are collected by authority of law, and detailed procedures and other aspects are covered in the law. So unless you know that law, you cannot be a tax collector. Then you need the knowledge of accounts. You need sector specific knowledge.
Hmm.
So I may be biased because coming from the same background, my opinion may be biased, but I personally think that only a person who has worked in the Federal Board of Revenue can
He's
be
the right person.
is the right person for the job, because the importance of the head of any organization cannot be overstated. He has to provide the leadership. He has to not only run the administration, but he also has to represent the organization on various fora of the government. He has to be answerable to the federal cabinet, to the economic coordination committee of the cabinet, and multiple forums under the government, as well as the taxpayers. The taxpayer is probably the most important stakeholder for a tax collecting machinery. So to face these multiple challenges, a person who has the requisite knowledge, only he can be the right person.
Hmm. No, he can be the right person, a person who has enriched extensive experience within the tax collecting authority. Or Dr. Iqbal Sahab, there have been scores of reports in the newspapers in the past regarding corruption within this tax collecting authority. Despite lucrative packages, despite high payments to the junior or the middle or the senior staff, why it has been so that most of the time there have been corruption cases within FBR involving top officers?
But then, sir, we have to realize that we cannot make an organization an island in itself. It
Hmm.
has to operate in the context
Within the
of the
system,
society.
exactly.
In
Within
the
the
context of the society, we can hold a organization accountable for malpractices only if the rest of the machinery is working fine. If the entire
wonderful.
machinery suffers from the same kind of malaise, we cannot expect a certain specific organization to be free from
Exactly.
that. So
Hmm.
unless we again, I may be talking in philosophic terms, but we need to revisit our social contract. We need to ensure that the government employees are being adequately compensated. We need
Are
to
paid well.
ensure,
Are
yes,
paid well.
and there
Exactly.
are not some islands where we need to realize that the recruitment procedure for the entire civil service is the same. We all of the entrants pass through the same examination. They initially get the
Hmm.
same training, and then they go to different fields. If there is heart burning among certain sections of the civil servant, some
True.
sections are receiving privileged treatments and others are feel deprived. That will definitely lead to a discontent, which will be a motivating force for
Hmm.
indulging in unsavory practices, which we can roughly call corruption. So we need to provide a fair deal not only to the citizens but also to the civil servants and public servants. If the
Please
government is
explain
treating them
this.
fairly, if the
Okay.
government is treating them fairly, they will treat the taxpayer fairly.
Dr. Iqbal Sahab, there is much talked term in FBR, that is SRO. All of a sudden, SRO is issued. Certain relaxations, certain incentives are given to a particular group or a company to benefit from relaxation. Then, within few hours, then another SRO is issued to block these all things. Certain on certain occasions, there have been certain shipments, certain imports. All of a sudden, an SRO was issued, and these all shipments were cleared. Within then no time, another SRO was issued, and all those incentives were referred. What is this game and the politics of SRO?
Matin sir, this may have been true about, let's say, 20 years back. About 10 years back, the procedure for issuance of SROs,
Yes,
especially the SROs which grant exemptions that you are referring to, that was changed.
exactly.
Now, Federal Board of Revenue cannot issue any SRO granting exemption to a specific class or a
Mhm.
specific sector on its own. That SRO has to be approved by the federal government. which means the federal
Federal
government.
capital.
And then the SROs issued in a year have to go to the parliament at the time of presentation of budget. So now there is an oversight, but not only oversight, but it would be more appropriate to say that the SRO granting power now no longer vests with the FBR, but it has been given to the federal cabinet. Obviously, FBR provides the assistance for preparation of SROs, and all the technical aspects are covered by FBR. But federal government has the power whether to issue an SRO or not to issue. So, what you are referring to was heard about 2 decades back. At that time, such practices must have
Were
been
on.
invoked, but now it is not
Exactly.
possible. Now it is not possible.
Now it is not possible. So, last but not the least, what do you think? What could be the way forward in developing a tax culture? Although you said that FBR's job is only limited in collecting tax, but since we are discussing it academically, there is also a general perception among the Pakistani people, from low income to the richest and to the elitist, that the taxes they pay to Pakistani government are not spent back on their welfare. To what extent it
Basically,
is? To just as
I
an
think
analyst.
I think a parliamentary oversight is essential. Parliament has to oversee the working of the executive, which is the government in this case. Unless the parliaments are duly facilitated in discharging this oversight function, and they also take up the ownership of that they are the people who are responsible to the citizens, to the electorate who has voted them into the parliament. If the role of parliamentary committees has to be strengthened, it has to be
Particularly Public Accounts Committee. Particularly
Public
Public
Accounts
Accounts.
Committee. We have some excellent people in the Parliament. I have interacted with the Senate Committee on Finance. It has been it has been constituted by some very knowledgeable public representatives, and they have helped us in discharging their functions. Their role needs to be strengthened. Similarly, the Finance Committee of the National Assembly also need to meet frequently and to look into the working of the government, especially FBR.
Thank you so much indeed, Dr. Muhammad Iqbal Sahab, for sharing your thoughts on overall tax system, tax culture, and why people are not interested to become filer, and about tax theft and many, many other important areas within FBR. Despite your busy schedule and despite the fact that you were busy and traveling, you spoke to Program Insight in videos English. We are so grateful to you. Dear viewers, till our next program, goodbye and Allah Hafiz from studios.